Hello, all, and this is Najma Smalls, welcoming you all to joining us for another episode of the Black Girls Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds podcast. I'm so delighted for all of you to spend time with you all again. Thank you to all of our listeners and viewers that make time out of your day to join our conversations, as our conversations are meant to open our minds and our hearts to different ways of thinking and seeing the world, and to hopefully point us all towards healing and deliverance. In this particular session, I'm so delighted that I have a wonderful woman with us. Her name is Natalie Navarette. Did I pronounce that correctly, Natalie?
Navarette. It's the double R's in Spanish, so Navarrete, but I
Oh,
go by Navarette.
Navarrete. I hope I'm close there.
So,
She's a 35-year-old mom who lives in Pennsylvania. She has four young boys, mixed race, half Mexican. She's a early childhood provider, um, has been a pre-K to infant school teacher assistant. She loves serving local families, loves supporting children. She's also worked as a nanny in her past life. And she's just an all around genuine person. She and I connected over social media and just talks about race relations and what it's like to raise boys of mixed race. So, Natalie is going to join us as we have a discussion centered around race and privilege and we can do moving forward to make our country a much better place, right? So I'm going to lead off with the first question. Natalie, what is white privilege and does it exist?
it absolutely exists. I guess that is a very good place to start. A lot of people, I feel like they could actually deny that it does, but the fact of the matter is, it absolutely exists. My personal definition would be white privilege is anybody of a lighter skin tone, even white passing, though you may not be of, you can't even see white descent, but of white colonies, that anybody who is white or white passing benefits from the way society sees and treats them. And a lot of times there are many benefits that we get without even recognizing it because we've never lived another experience. So it absolutely exists.
You said a lot in just that sentence. One thing is that it's not just for white, pure white
Yeah,
individuals, people who are white passing or their proximity to whiteness is much more closer to than someone of mine and have may have benefited from white privilege. And then the second part of it is that sometimes you just don't know because you've never been on the other end of that. And so you
exactly.
don't know that that white privilege even exists until someone points it out to you. So, for example, there have been so many court cases, even up until now, like the Crown Act that has recently been passed that says that women can't be discriminated because of their hair color, but because of their hairstyles,
Hmm.
because so many, particularly Black women, have been discriminated because of wearing braids and more natural ethnic looking styles into the workplace and professional settings that many of our white counterparts have never had to experience. So that right there is a prime example of white privilege because it's difficult sometimes if you want to wear a certain hairstyle and you believe that it's comfortable for you, true for you. And sometimes these hairstyles may be more affordable for us, right? But you have to stop and realize that you may be discriminated against because of that. So that is definitely white privilege right there that people don't understand. And
Absolutely.
that's also tying us into systematic racism as well, when people don't understand that there is racism embedded in our system. So thank you for that. Why do you think it's so hard for people to acknowledge their privilege?
A lot of it to me is just one, if you're surrounded, your family is possibly all white, your community is all white, there aren't many people crossing your path to call it out. So unless you're sometimes actively seeking to do better and educate yourself, you may not have a reason to, and a lot of people don't want to do the work unless they see it personally affecting them. So I think that's what makes a lot of white people that, kind of, there's these pockets of populations where there's more diversity and there's less diversity. A
Mhm.
lot of times we get into these pockets where there's less diversity, and if you're one of those people, it's easy to ignore the real issues, but it doesn't mean they don't exist.
I completely agree with you 100% there. And then, like you said, sometimes people just don't have a reason to acknowledge their
Hmm.
privilege, right? If you're around people that look like you and behave like you all day, every day, then it's comfortable for you. So there's
Exactly.
no reason until you get into a position where either you are able to see it for yourself or someone brings it up and you're like, wait, hey, let me take a look and step back and say, there is some privilege here. Let's
Yeah.
talk about white fragility.
Hmm.
Do you believe that white fragility exists? And what does that mean when we say white fragility?
Yeah, I definitely believe that fragility that exists because I don't know. Could it almost be maybe the precursor to recognizing your privilege? Because I feel like that fragility, that's that defense mechanism that when somebody's calling you out, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Wait, like some people are going to say, no, no, I'm not. Or somebody's going to
Mhm,
sit there and they're going to reflect on it.
mhm,
So the people that are willing to sit there and feel uncomfortable and be, what, I actually welcome being called out, which is a hard thing to
mhm,
do for any human.
mhm.
um that fragility may just be a mask into saying I'm either willing or not willing to accept, that there are different, points of view and ways of living and different things that people experience.
Yes, I completely agree with you on that. Yeah. I love the way you put that it's a mask and it's a defense mechanism. It's like when you see someone crumble because you said something or you're like, "Hey, this isn't cool." Then they crumble or they cry or whatever the case is. And
Yeah.
then that's the fragility that is rising up. And but people do, they're not willing to recognize their own fragility.
Yeah.
And they bleed on everybody else because they're not willing to recognize it. And a big part of that ties into the discussions about race. Because I firmly believe, so let me say this, Natalie. So growing up in my household, I'm from South Carolina, and my parents grew up in the Jim Crow era. And so race was discussed a lot in my home. And it was like every day, it was like an everyday conversation. And the Klan used to march right downtown. Anyone from Rock Hill, South Carolina knows that the Klan marched up until I think the 90s with wearing the white hoods in the center of downtown doing their protests. And the hard thing about that was that you never knew who was under that hood. It
Yeah.
could be your child's teacher, it could be your doctor, whatever the case is, right? You just didn't
Yeah.
know who. And so it traumatized us in a way that I don't think people are able to really see. And so because of that, we had to have a lot of conversations about race. But I've noticed that some of my white counterparts have a hard time talking about race. I live in a predominantly white neighborhood. And I'm the type of person, I don't care who you are, you're welcome into my home and I'm gonna treat you with respect. I don't care if you have
Mhm.
one eye,
Yeah.
five
Yeah.
ears, you come into my home, Imma treat you with respect until you give me a reason not to. And I'm an
Yeah.
open person. I'll be friends with anybody. In conversations about race, anytime it was brought up, it was like, she's talking about race. And then one friend even said to me, we feel like you talk about race too much and it's exhausting. So why do you think white people have an issue with discussing race?
Something like I said, when it comes up again, it's that natural, I feel, defense, because who wants to be called out? Though
Mhm,
it may be entirely reasonable to do so,
mhm,
nobody likes that. And I think
mhm,
to me, a lot of it is that initial gut reaction that if you're making me uncomfortable, I'm not going to talk about it. And to me, that's where a lot of it is. something like I've suggested, like if you do come across somebody that seems like they may be willing, but maybe in that moment they need some time to sit with that, while yes, it would be nice to discuss at that time, say, you know what, I appreciate seeing that you're willing to talk about this. Maybe let's come back to this in a few days. At
Mhm,
least give them that opportunity to come back to it rather than entirely shut down, or welcome them to come back. If any of you, felt you had anything to speak on this conversation,
mm,
let's talk one on one sometime. Somehow to keep that door open. That goes for anybody, a person of color talking to a white person talking to a white person. Any conversation that you're going to have, it's going to be important and it's needed. So I think keeping that door open for the people who are willing to walk through it or consider it, we need to keep that door open. And I don't think that we should back down from the conversation, no matter how much people, don't like it. So
exactly, exactly, and I can't imagine Natalie being I don't know how that works if because I've had white friends who are married to black men, and I'm like, "So y'all don't discuss race ever?"
yeah, right. It's
So
all. Yeah. Do you have a question for that?
no, I was just gonna say, how does that work? And I
Exactly.
mean, you may
Yeah,
not
I
even know,
I
but
I don't know how that works. Like for me, I was married to a Mexican American, and
mhm,
so it took until even like through the dating and stuff, it wasn't really talked about because you're, that honeymoon phase, you're wanting to get to know each other. He's actually first generation Mexican here, so his
mhm,
family, his parents were immigrants. So it did actually take me a while. This is only from my perspective, but to
mhm,
realize how different our cultures are, despite both
mhm,
growing up in America, that we come from very different backgrounds. And I think I could say I wasn't ready to recognize that. There were some things that were hard for me to adjust to, like with his culture, because in my head, again, I didn't have to ever experience anything different. And I think as we grow up, for any individual, your childhood, your home life, that is your entire world. That is all you know. So unless you are exposed to differences, unless you're talking about differences and diversity and equality, unless those things are happening and happening on purpose, your entire world may just, be wrapped up in the one thing that you ever knew. And we
mhm.
just fail to look outside of that. And until we're exposed to it, it really takes recognizing and unlearning.
Yeah, recognizing and unlearning. That's the key part about it. And I also feel like I'm a firm believer if you love someone, you want to know about them and you want to create a space that is safe
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
So for me, with my friends, I tell them you could talk to me about anything. 'Cause I want to create safety for you. I want to understand you. I want to there are so many things that I don't understand about the world we live in. I shoot, having small kids, I don't even understand TikTok half the time, but
Yeah. Huh.
it's all about getting into their world and
Hmm.
trying to see the world from their lens instead of shutting them out because you're putting up a guard. When you say, I don't want to talk about this or whatever the case is, you're already like putting distance and isolation there and being in silos.
Can I say
Go
one
ahead.
thing? Something I hear a lot of white people that might be in a mixed race relationship, or I was mentioning in some of our conversations, like about my mom
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, I have a black coworker," or "My husband is black," or of this, descent or culture or whatever. That doesn't make you exempt from privilege. That does not. Just because the person you love is of a different race, that doesn't mean you are exempt from it. That changes basically nothing. Unless you're willing to admit it. Quite frankly, it doesn't. So using that as an excuse, oh, I have black family members. Okay, good for you. But what are you doing to understand their experience? What are you doing to make it a better place? So it's like, okay, I'm glad, but like, what are you doing to make it better?
What are you doing to make it better? I love that. Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. What are you doing to make things better? And I hear that all the time on both ends of the spectrum. I have white friends, I have black friends, or whatever the case is. But, I work with the, I was like, I go to lunch with a white girl every week.
Yeah,
Okay. What does
yeah,
that mean?
exactly.
You got to take it a step further. So you're raising two biracial boys, right?
4.
Um, 4 oh, 4, that's right, 4 biracial boys. Ooh, girl, you got your hands full.
Yeah.
Boys are a lot. I have 1. So, w may I ask, is everyone in your family like you? Are they all open? Have you faced any in regards to your family, any opposition?
Um, so as in my immediate family, no, like my kids and
Mhm,
like my ex-husband and stuff, but my extended family, I've had a few conversations with some of them, some very heated conversations with some of them, and they aren't received well. They're not.
mm,
And it does suck when it's your family because there are going to be people that they're just not willing or ready to recognize it. There's going to be. And unfortunately, I feel like I do have some of those people in my family. And, I've had to decide where I want my relationship to stand with them because of it. So, unfortunately, I do have people that aren't as open as me, but that also doesn't mean I didn't have the conversation. I did because we had to get to where we are for some reason. So, yeah,
I love that, and your kids are seeing very early on that mommy, A, she advocates for me, and B, she's not afraid to having the hard conversations because believe it or not, there are adults that shy away from having hard conversations. And I'm just a firm believer like hard conversations are a big part of any relationship. Like you have to
yeah,
be comfortable with having the hard conversations. Do not come to me and want to have any type of relationship with me and you cannot have the hard conversation because I need the space to say, you hurt my feelings, it's hurt my feelings, or whatever the case is, and vice versa. I'm going to give you the space to say it as well. And I think we both grow because of that. And I've been teaching my kids to have the hard conversations. But as of lately, I had to also incorporate while you may become comfortable with having hard conversations, other people may not be comfortable with that.
that's
And you have
exactly
to
it.
be willing to accept that and
Yeah.
know that you did your part and move on.
Exactly. Yeah. And for probably someone like you and I, that's hard to accept. It's hard to
Mhm.
accept. But at the end of the day, that's all you can do. You opened the door, you tried to have the conversation, you can't force somebody to walk through it. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of
Mhm.
how it is sometimes.
Yeah. Have you noticed that, like, since you've had your boys, like, you become more aware in terms of, like, just always mindful of, like, how they're being treated and especially if they go to school, just always mindful and just paying attention to how other people treat them and respond to them?
I think I would say that they're white passing. You can tell they have a different skin tone than I do, but I would still call them white passing. And maybe it's my privilege that I'm not recognizing some things because I have had that pointed out when I was married that I'm totally oblivious to these looks and things that people were giving my then husband,
Mhm,
and that's current day. That was within the 10 years ago.
mhm.
So for my own kids, they have pretty good friend groups, that I'm good friends with
Important.
their moms and stuff. I'm pretty close to, each of them have like two or three close friends and we're close. So I would not be afraid to have a conversation, trust me, if there were something to arise. But I do feel like they've got some pretty good group of friends and stuff that I haven't had to be as closely aware of it.
I love that. Thank you so much for, being transparent about that. Yeah, and it's difficult, right? Because you're not used to it. And the blessing is that they have a good core group of friends. So you
Yeah.
can let your guard down and you don't have to worry as much. So that is great. So let's shift to talks about the recent election. So, 2024 election. Historically, women tend to vote Democratic. However, in 2024, we saw white women, 3% of white women voted for Trump. To many, it feels as if 53% of white women voted against women in general in terms of like women's rights, and they voted
Mhm.
against Black America. And many of our immigrant community that came over here as refugees and so forth that are trying to escape certain atrocities that are going on in their own home country. Not trying to make you the spokesperson for all white women, but
Yeah,
what is it about the Trump dialect? What is it about him that made people, particularly white women, be okay with casting that vote for him?
exactly. I've had a hard time coming to grips with that. The only conclusion that I have come to is I have likened their vote to this white supremacist, quite frankly, as being in a toxic relationship. You know, when you get into a toxic relationship, the more and more you go through the like bad behaviors, abuse, different things, you get used to those poor behaviors and you start losing sight of what actual normal and healthy behaviors look like. And the only thing I can really liken it to is that in America, we have gotten so used to and accepting of toxic masculinity that for whatever reason, Trump, I'm saying Trump as respectfully because I would call him something else, has gotten has gotten away. He knew the playbook of a narcissist. He knew how to weasel his way in. He knew how to manipulate the public and to have these more and more just outrageous behaviors, phrases, these things that he says to be acceptable. And the more that he does it, the more normal it feels. And so that's really the only way I've been able to come to terms with it is describing it as a toxic relationship that we know we need to get out of, but we're also comfortable in.
I completely agree with you because I've been trying to wrap my head around it, and I'm always the type of person that tries to see the other perspective. And I know it's a lot of fear, right? That he pushes down everyone's throats.
Mhm.
And it's part of it, I think, is fear of inflation, in which
Oh yeah,
people, if you don't know, you don't understand that he created part of that inflation. But
exactly.
back when he was in office before. And so it's mind boggling to me how, especially women, white men, we get it. We know they're going to vote for
Yeah,
Trump because they can
yeah.
identify with him. But it's like women, I'm like, I don't understand. Like, we're
I
supposed to
know
be on the same team. What's up with
exactly.
y'all? So, yeah. And unfortunately, it was eye opening and
Devastating.
um, devastating. Yeah, to say the least. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What is it that frightens you or concerns you, I should say, I don't wanna say frightened, concerns you and your family about another 4 years of Trump mess?
So the to put it like more generally before more specifically, I'd say if you're not a cis white male, your rights are at stake, essentially. He has threatened every community in one way or another, whether it's black, or there's that you're queer, disabled, an immigrant. He, in one way or another, he has threatened to take rights away from many communities unless you are a white straight male. So I feel like that alone, a lot of people don't recognize, or they don't want to recognize, or maybe they do, and that's what I call willful ignorance, that they do recognize it and they're okay with accepting it. That a lot of most of America's lives have the risk of being changed entirely within his next 4 years. If he really is able to accomplish what he says, it's quite scary. It really is quite scary. And that obviously is going to affect me personally, but it's also going to affect the masses. So, like I wouldn't want to speak alone for myself because I know I'm not the only one going to be going through that. And for me, the only peace I can find is knowing I'm not the only one going through that. So connecting with the people who are more like-minded with me through it, we can help each other get through it would probably just be my best advice. But I think to say if it would affect me personally, like that's yes, it will, but that's not really fair to say because it's going to affect many, 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 many of us.
Mhm.
So
I agree, many of us, and it's unfortunate. And willful ignorance persists. Absolutely. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
On to allyship. Many of us in the Black community, we live around white Americans, we work with them, and so on. And I think there's a difference in terms of our relationships. Like, I think many of us we can be coworkers, we can be colleagues, we can be
Mhm.
associates. Friends and allyship, I think, are very different, right? And I think, and I've learned just as of my recent own experience that, like I mentioned earlier, if you're a really friend to someone, you that means you love them, and you have to love all of them. And then an ally is something completely different. What do you what does it mean to you to be an ally? And why is this important, particularly now?
So for me, currently, like where I'm at in like my advocacy and stuff, I know I'm a baby in all of this. I'm still learning my way and finding my voice. But for me, what it currently means is that I'm speaking up on white privilege. I'm calling out white privilege. I'm educating people on systemic racism and calling that out. A lot of people say, and I know there's controversy with things like I could have a BLM sticker on my car, Black Lives Matter, right?
Mhm.
All that is a sticker. What does that mean? Am I actually supporting Black lives? Rather than just saying okay, or like the blue bracelet. Oh, to me that is I guess it's controversial for some people, but to me, I know an example, like for me personally, when I go to a doctor and I see they have an LGBTQ pin on, I
Mm.
immediately feel more at ease. That doesn't mean that I know they're actively doing things in their life, but at a minimum, I know that they're accepting. So something like that for me, like wearing the blue bracelet or having some kind of accessory or something that says you're, friends and allies of other communities, that's one thing. But for me, what I'm trying to do is to move into actually being vocal about it. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to call you out. I'm not going to back down from that. So it's taking it one step further than just saying, "Hey, I'm cool black people. Hey, I'm cool queer people." Like it's more than that. You have to speak up and point out why that was wrong. Or why your privilege may have, it got you to that place that perhaps that other person didn't get to. And pointing those little things out, to me sometimes it feels so small and it's hard to not feel like I'm not doing enough because I'm one person. But and I try to tell myself too, but if like one person is doing, many people are doing this one thing, we can make a difference. And that's why I think these smaller conversations are important. um so for me, it really is just speaking up and calling out behaviors whenever they're seen, or having the conversations whenever they're able to be had.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that's hard though, because I think it means you have to be comfortable enough in your own skin
Yeah.
to accept that you are going to ruffle some feathers,
Yeah.
to accept that it may cost you some relationships. And I also feel like you have to really be aligned spiritually, because this is really spiritual work, not in the sense of like religion spiritually,
Hmm.
but it's something bigger than all of us, right? This is
Yeah.
something that you could be known for when you're dead and gone, right? I was reading Asatu Shakur's book, and she was talking about her grandmother and just how her grandmother owned land in near the beach in North Carolina. And when the white supremacists would come through and try to take the land, she would come out there in her shotgun and then shoot at them. And this is at a time when she could have been severely beaten or harmed because of this, but she stood her
Hmm.
ground. So it's here I am years after this lady is dead and gone. I'm reading about her. And it inspires me and motivates me. So I that's why I say this is truly spiritual work, and the work that will outlive all of us. But I don't believe everybody's cut out for us, because not everybody is strong enough like you are, Natalie, to be okay with losing some relationships. Everyone is not strong enough to be able to say, you know what, this is not right. This is not how you treat people. and handle it. But imagine if the world were filled with Natalies that were truly an ally to us, we would be much further along, right? We would truly be an advanced nation, right? But comfort can sometimes be our enemy because people
Yeah.
want to keep those friendships. They don't want to ruffle feathers, especially as Black Americans. We've been raised to stand up. We
Mhm.
always we've seen pictures of everyone who marched on Martin Luther King. I think many of us in my generation, we wish we had been alive when Martin Luther
Mhm.
King was alive so that we could march and protest with him and all of those sorts of things. Comfortable with doing that, right? And so I know that not everyone has been raised or conditioned to be okay with standing up for what you
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
And that is
Absolutely. And
truly
you're recognizing that in me, so thank you.
sure, anytime. So as a mommy, what do you tell your kids about race? Do y'all talk about it at all?
I taking it back to like my preschooler even, he's 4, okay? And these conversations do start young. So just explaining to him, he has some friend there's diversity in his classroom, so he has some friends that
Mhm.
don't look like him. And so I've asked him, can you imagine what that would feel like if somebody came in there and told you, "No, I'm sorry, you can't sit with your friend. Look at their skin color, it's different than you." To me, when you bring it all the way back to childhood, it's really easy to see that hate, we're not born with it. It is
Mhm.
learned. It is very much learned. It is very much either through family, through society, in one way or another. White privilege is going to get you. It's going to get you. So when you take it all the way back that far, you have to, because that's really where it begins, because if we're not teaching our kids to remain open, the world is going to tell them otherwise. The world is going to tell them it's okay to treat somebody like that. And if I'm not doing my job as a parent and having those conversations, I would feel horrible that, I seriously failed. I seriously failed if I'm not being honest with them and having conversations. And just this is a real thing that's happening. It is real things that have happened, and we need to continue to do better and speak up so that we can have a future where there may be more equality than there is now, that there truly is equality. So again, I'm not, that's just part of who I am. I'm not scared to have real conversations. And because you can have them in age appropriate ways. You don't have to tell them all the horrible, really scary things, but you tell them enough that they know it's real, that it really happened. So to me, and being in early childhood, like, it's easy for me to kind of cater to their needs at their age. But I don't think talking to kids or talking to your own kids, there's not like a certain age you have this talk. Just have it throughout life. Make it a normal part of life. Make it a safe space. I keep my doors open. I love when my kids come to me with things that sound vulnerable. Like, I love that. It makes me so proud that they feel that they can come to me, and I'm really happy about that. And I hope that they can always have that with me. So just making sure that they know you're a safe, open space means a lot too.
I live in, as I mentioned, predominantly white neighborhood. My kids go to a predominantly white school, and we started to have incidents. It's not just me, other families of color started to have incidents where our children were called the N word, and children would say, I can't play with you because you look
Mhm.
different from me, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And so, even up until a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a parent and they were telling me that child was called this word or whatever the case is. And then there's other kids that were like, why aren't you voting for Trump? All of this crazy nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And so and told them, I said, it's a part of a larger problem because parents are not having the conversations about race at home. So when
Yeah.
they do pick up a TikTok, when they do hear these words from their peers, they are saying it, they don't have any other context, so they just feel,
Exactly.
if I'm going to hurt you, this is something I'm going to use. It's now a tool to hurt each
Yeah.
other with. And I'm telling you, if you are listening and if you are not having the conversations with your child about race in your home, pardon my French, but you are raising a shitty human being. I firmly believe that you could possibly be raising a shitty human being. And you are continuing on the white supremacy legacy that many of us are trying to erase and eradicate. And so I can you believe in my school we had our first Black History Month event last year, and I'm the one who, and it's crazy when I tell people that, they're like, "Just last year?"
That's
Yeah,
wild, yeah. That's
to help mitigate this, right? Because many families, the only thing they've heard and understood about Black America is that they came over here on a boat.
mhm.
And they were
Yeah.
slaves. Like, they don't know the context, they don't know any of the
And they're not
accomplishments
taught
they did.
correct history either. They're not. So it is whitewashed history that they're learning in school. Even as an adult, I get mad. I'm like, why am I learning about this now? Why did I not know this earlier? Like it's frustrating. And I'm so sorry about that experience. I mean, it's horrible for a child that
Thank you.
young to have to learn that this exists.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. So, what do you wanna say, Natalie, to any white woman, any white family out here that may be listening, that may be struggling with this, that maybe haven't had the conversations, that may not even know where to begin with checking their own privilege and understanding? Where do you suggest they start, and what do you wanna say to them?
So a couple, give me one sec. Some resources, because for me, I'm not a big reader. So some resources that I like are more like videos and documentaries and things like that. Okay, now as silly as this sounds, Adam Conover, he used to have a show called Adam Ruins Everything, and that's one of the first times I heard about like deconstructing systemic racism. He does
Mm.
things like about weddings, about diamonds, about the
Mhm.
suburbs, about prison, and he during that show he posts his sources so you can go and check it yourself that these are the true facts. And I think the reason seasons didn't go on much longer is because it was the truth. So
Mhm.
one of the first times I heard that was really like talking about systemic racism and how going from slavery to imprisonment, how that's where it started, because we realized that white people didn't want to do the work that people of color were doing. So what
Mhm.
do? We're making these small infractions illegal and sending them to prison to get them to do it again. So that's where it started. So he has some really good episodes kind of deconstructing some of those more like government and systemic things that really helped me understand a lot. There's also a really good documentary. I think even if you don't have kids, but obviously kids are our future. It's called it's a mini series. It's called The School That Tried to End Racism. I do believe it was in the UK. There was a New York principal that went over to the UK, but it addressed it at like ages like probably like 10, 11, 12, like right before they went to middle school. And it addressed that even like it was Harvard or some school or something did this really profound study on how to test somebody's biases. And it was quite shocking to see that the white kids and the black kids both showed that they had biases to white society. Because even if you're growing up as a black child, if you're surrounded by a white community and white society, you're going to be affected. Even you're not seeing yourself reflected. You know what I mean, talking about these microaggressions and things that kids of color that are young are going through. They they don't recognize that that's not an experience of their white peers. So even in that regard, their white peers aren't recognizing that their friends of color are experiencing racism. That is a real thing. So that was a really great mini series. And if you have to take it elementary, take it elementary if that's what it takes to get you there. That's a really great miniseries to watch about deconstructing racism, and it takes the kids through like many different projects throughout weeks and stuff
Mm.
about reflecting on their whiteness, or what it means to be a person of color. They make safe spaces. They have a white group, they have the black group, and then so they have safe places to talk about their feelings and conversations, and then they have someone guide them in coming together. And how do we have this conversation moving forward? So in ways it could be a really good blueprint in taking notes and how we can move forward in conversations.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna have to look into some of those myself. It sounds very interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Natalie, for your transparency, for your time, for spending time with us. Shout to everybody your socials where they can find you and follow you.
I'm on TikTok. It's just at Mo4BZ. That's basically the only thing. I have Facebook, but it's more for my business, which is doula and nanny stuff. But personally, where I'm, that's Natalie Navarette LLC. But that's where I'm at. You can find me there.
Thank you again, Natalie, and thank you all listeners. Listen, if you're a white man or woman, please have a conversation with someone who doesn't look like you and just ask them some questions and get to understand who they are. If you love someone, regardless of your race, if you love someone who is different from you, um, get to know them, get to really understand, listen to them, make them feel seen and heard. Okay. Thank you all for tuning in to the Black Girl